In the 21st century, a new Cold War brews, not across the Iron Curtains of Europe but through the invisible circuits of trade, technology, and ideology. The rivals are not merely military giants but civilizational forces: the United States of America, the self-proclaimed defender of liberal democracy, and the People's Republic of China, the heir of an ancient empire reborn through communism and nationalism. Their conflict is not merely about borders or armies, it is about who defines the world order: a liberal capitalist system led by the West or a multipolar world where the East demands equal footing. But this confrontation didn't emerge overnight. The rivalry between the eagle and the dragon is a century-long story, woven from admiration, betrayal, ideology, and ambition. Part 1, From Allies to Adversaries, the Historical Arc. 1. The Early Encounters, Missionaries and Merchants. The U.S.-China relationship began not with conflict but curiosity. In the 19th century, American merchants, missionaries, and educators flocked to the Middle Kingdom. Unlike European colonial powers, America had no territorial ambitions in China. Instead, it promoted the Open Door Policy, 1899, calling for equal trade access and China's territorial integrity. This moralistic approach gave the US an image of a benevolent power, contrasting with Britain's Opium Wars and Japan's expansionism. Yet, beneath this idealism lay a clear strategic vision: America wanted a vast Asian market for its goods, without being excluded by European empires. China, however, was then the sick man of Asia, torn by warlords, corruption, and humiliation under Western imperialism. America's open door was less a friendship than an early assertion of economic influence without occupation, a prelude to its later style of global dominance. 2. The World War II Alliance, Chiang Kai-shek and Roosevelt. The US and China became allies in World War II after Japan's invasion of China in 1937. Washington backed Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government, sending arms, funds, and General Joseph Stilwell to assist the Chinese resistance. To President Franklin D. Roosevelt, China symbolized Asia's democratic hope, a partner against both fascism and colonialism. The wartime rhetoric was lofty: China will be the great power of the East, Roosevelt predicted. But the alliance was uneasy. Corruption plagued the nationalists, while American frustration grew at their inefficiency. Meanwhile, Mao Zedong's communists gained ground among peasants, winning hearts with discipline and nationalist fervor. When the war ended in 1945, America hoped for a democratic China, but got a revolution instead. 3. 1949, the Communist Victory and America's Shock. In 1949, Mao's Communist Party triumphed, declaring the People's Republic of China, PRC. For Washington, this was a geopolitical earthquake. America saw it not as a Chinese revolution, but as another domino in the spread of global communism, following the Soviet model. The US refused to recognize Mao's regime, instead supporting Chiang Kai-shek's exiled government in Taiwan. Thus began 2 decades of hostility: no diplomatic relations, no trade, no trust. The Cold War now stretched across the Pacific. The Korean War, 1950–53, cemented enmity. When US-led UN forces pushed into North Korea, Chinese troops intervened, turning the war into a bloody stalemate. To Americans, this confirmed that Red China was a Soviet ally bent on expansion. To the Chinese, it proved that America sought to encircle and subjugate them. The dragon and the eagle had crossed claws. Part 2, Nixon's Gamble and the Era of Engagement. 4. The Great Reopening, Nixon, Mao, and Realpolitik, 1971–1979. By the 1970s, the geopolitical chessboard had changed. The Soviet Union was the US's chief rival, and Beijing had split with Moscow after ideological disputes. President Richard Nixon, guided by strategist Henry Kissinger, saw a golden opportunity: use China to counterbalance the USSR. In 1971, Kissinger made a secret trip to Beijing. The next year, Nixon himself shook hands with Mao Zedong, marking one of the most dramatic diplomatic reversals in modern history. For China, reopening ties with the US ended decades of isolation. For America, it was a masterstroke of realpolitik, playing one communist power against another. The two countries established diplomatic relations in 1979, with Washington recognizing Beijing as the One China and cutting formal ties with Taiwan. This era was one of cautious cooperation, built less on love and more on strategic necessity. 5. The Economic Awakening, Deng Xiaoping's reforms. After Mao's death in 1976, Deng Xiaoping emerged as China's paramount leader. He launched the Reform and Opening Up policy, 1978, inviting foreign investment and technology while maintaining political control. American corporations rushed in, drawn by cheap labor, vast markets, and government stability. Washington, meanwhile, saw engagement as a tool of transformation. Trade and capitalism would, it hoped, liberalize China politically. This was the era of constructive engagement. China joined the global economy, and both sides benefited. The US gained low-cost goods and access to China's markets. China gained capital, technology, and a route out of poverty. But beneath the prosperity, a question simmered: what if economic modernization did not bring democracy? Part 3: The Illusion of Harmony and its Unraveling. 6. 1989, Tiananmen Square, The Moral Divide. The Tiananmen Square Massacre, 1989, shattered the illusion of convergence. As Chinese students demanded democracy, America's hopes of a liberalizing China soared, until the tanks rolled in. Washington condemned the crackdown and imposed sanctions, but within years, trade resumed. Realpolitik triumphed over idealism once again. China was too big, too important, too profitable to isolate. The episode revealed a pattern that would define U.S.-China relations for decades: moral outrage, followed by pragmatic compromise. 7. The 1990s, 2000s, globalization's golden years. Through the 1990s and early 2000s, the US and China entered a period of deep interdependence. 1992 to 2008, American companies offshored manufacturing to China. 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, WTO, with US support. 2000s, US consumers enjoyed cheap products. China accumulated massive trade surpluses. It was a marriage of convenience. China became the world's factory, and America the world's consumer. But this marriage bred tension. American industries hollowed out, millions of jobs disappeared, and China used its growing wealth to expand military and political influence. The belief that capitalism would democratize China proved naive. By the late 2000s, Beijing had become a techno-authoritarian powerhouse, while Washington had grown dependent on its economic rival. 8. The Obama era, cooperation and containment. President Barack Obama sought balance, engaging China economically while countering its regional ambitions through the Pivot to Asia strategy. China, under Xi Jinping, since 2012, had different ideas. She launched the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, building ports, railways, and digital infrastructure across Asia, Africa, and Europe, reshaping global trade routes under Chinese influence. In the South China Sea, Beijing built artificial islands and militarized them, challenging freedom of navigation. The US responded with freedom of navigation patrols and deeper ties with allies like Japan, India, and Australia, eventually forming the Quad Alliance. Thus began the geopolitical phase of the U.S.-China conflict. A contest not just for trade, but for the future balance of global power. Part 4: The Trade War and Tech War. 9. Trump's confrontation, the economic battlefield. President Donald Trump, 2017 to 2021, shattered decades of bipartisan consensus by openly declaring China an economic adversary. He accused Beijing of intellectual property theft, currency manipulation, and unfair trade practices, launching tariffs on billions of dollars of Chinese goods. China retaliated, leading to the most intense trade confrontation since the Cold War. But the dispute was about more than trade, it was about technological supremacy. The US targeted Chinese tech giants like Huawei and ZTE, restricting their access to American chips and software. It also pressured allies to exclude Huawei from 5G networks. The tech war was, in essence, the new arms race. Whoever controlled AI, semiconductors, and digital infrastructure would control the future. 10. COVID-19 and the breakdown of trust. The COVID-19 pandemic, 2020, deepened mistrust. US officials accused China of mishandling information about the virus's origins. China, in turn, blamed Western mismanagement and hypocrisy. Both nations weaponized narratives, turning a public health crisis into a propaganda war. At the same time, supply chain disruptions revealed America's dangerous dependence on Chinese manufacturing, especially in pharmaceuticals, electronics, and rare earth materials. Calls for decoupling grew louder, the idea that America must rebuild self-sufficiency and reduce reliance on China. Part 5: The New Cold War, Ideology, Technology, and Power. 11. The Biden Era, Strategic Competition, Not Friendship. President Joe Biden inherited the rivalry and institutionalized it. He framed China as America's most consequential competitor, a blend of ideological and strategic threat. The Biden administration launched several initiatives. CHIPS and Science Act, 2022 to boost domestic semiconductor production. AUKUS Pact, 2021 a military alliance with Australia and the UK to counter Chinese power in the Indo-Pacific. Strengthened Quad alliance with India, Japan, and Australia. Bans on advanced AI chip exports to China in 2023 to 24. Meanwhile, China pursued self-reliance, investing in homegrown chip manufacturing, AI, quantum computing, and green energy. Thus, both sides entered a cycle of mutual containment, not full decoupling, but strategic distancing. 12. Taiwan, the flashpoint of the future. No issue symbolizes U.S.O China tensions more than Taiwan. Beijing sees it as a sacred part of Chinese territory. Washington views it as a democratic partner and linchpin of Indo-Pacific security. The US follows a One China policy officially, but arms Taiwan and pledges to defend its democracy unofficially. Xi Jinping has vowed reunification, while US presidents have hinted at intervention if China invades. As Taiwan produces over 60% of the world's semiconductors, through TSMC, any war there would devastate the global economy. The Taiwan Strait has thus become the most dangerous flashpoint of the 21st century. 13. The global chessboard, influence and soft power. The rivalry now extends far beyond Asia. In Africa, China builds infrastructure, the US promotes governance and security. In Latin America, China invests in energy and mining, the US warns of debt traps. In Europe, China's trade lures nations, but Washington urges unity under NATO and democracy. Even in space, both powers race to dominate the moon's resources and orbital technology. This is no longer a bilateral dispute, it is a civilizational competition for global leadership. Part 6: The Ideological Divide and Future Scenarios. 14. Democracy versus authoritarianism. At its core, the U.S. China conflict is not just about economics or power, it's about ideological legitimacy. The US argues that democracy, free markets, and individual liberty are universal values. China counters that stability, collective progress, and sovereignty are more important than Western-style democracy. Xi Jinping promotes the China model, a blend of state-led capitalism and one-party rule, as a viable alternative to Western liberalism. This ideological clash fuels the competition for global influence, especially in the global south. 15. Decoupling or coexistence. Despite the rhetoric, full economic decoupling is unlikely. The two economies remain intertwined. China is America's top trading partner. US corporations still rely on Chinese consumers and manufacturing. China holds over $800 billion in US debt. Yet, selective decoupling, in critical sectors like semiconductors, defense, and digital infrastructure, is accelerating. The future may resemble competitive coexistence, rivals in some arenas, partners in others. 16. The future, from containment to competition. The U.S. China conflict will likely define the 21st century much as the U.S. Soviet rivalry defined the 20th. But unlike the Soviet Union, China is deeply integrated into the global economy and technologically sophisticated. Its rise cannot be contained in the traditional sense. The real question is not who wins, but whether both can coexist without catastrophic war, especially over Taiwan or technology. Conclusion: the world between two suns. The story of the U.S.-China conflict is not a simple duel between good and evil. It is the story of two civilizations, each believing it represents the path to progress, each fearing the other's dominance. America champions freedom, but its global wars and hypocrisies tarnish its ideals. China preaches stability, but suppresses dissent and exports authoritarian control. Both powers, in their pursuit of supremacy, risk burning the very world they seek to lead. The 21st century stands between two suns. One, the eagle, fierce yet aging, upholding a liberal order built after World War II. The other, the dragon, rising with silent confidence, promising an alternative modernity. Their conflict will not only decide the fate of nations but the future shape of civilization itself, whether it bends toward freedom, control, or a fragile balance of both.